Hi, my name is Kathleen McMahon, and I'm here today to talk to you about how Gatsby and MDX can make your component library documentation smoothly inclusive. Before we begin, let's get some details out of the way. My slide deck will be posted on Noticed, including links to resources I briefly touch upon during the presentation. That's https://noti.st.resource11. The full URL will be available later today on Twitter. You can follow me at resource11 on Twitter, Instagram, and GitHub. Let's back up a bit so I can introduce myself better. So I am an engineer, a designer, and I'm a conference speaker. And I race bikes pretty badly. Mostly you'll see me in costume racing 2 laps to your 6 at the back of the pack on a single speed bike. Mostly, unless something happens. Like a pandemic kicking in our doors. Then your racing season is postponed. So, while I'm a super slow bike racer, I'm also a super fan of design systems, especially the component library parts. And before COVID flattened pretty much everything for everyone, I was the tech lead for the O'Reilly Media design system. While I was there, I learned a lot about streamlining component libraries and optimizing documentation. If you've never worked on a design system, let's just say there are a lot of moving parts. And if your core team is small and you're rebooting your component library, you really have to choose your focus and rely on your contributors. In our case, our focus was take the business logic out and add the accessibility features in. We fixed our colors, our components, our patterns, and rebooted our docs. Once that was done, we realized that a part of our system was becoming a hindrance for our team and a barrier to entry for our contributors. That was our documentation. Our process was spread across 2 projects, the design system repo and design system docs repo. In the design system repo, the documentation content was stored in 2 locations, while the docs repo held the site scaffolding and docs layout components. To get up and running, you had to follow a detailed series of steps to sync, run scripts, grab files, parse information, generate data, and render the docs into a React app. Phew. Just getting started working with these repos was overwhelming for new contributors, to say the least. But wait, there's more. The scripts were set up in such a way that you had to write your markdown in a very specific order in order for your content to show up in the docs. Your button heading could be paired with an intro paragraph, but only 1 paragraph. Same with your variants, only 1 paragraph and then a code block. Best practices had to be written as an unordered list, always. Same with the related components section, always an unordered list. So while our doc script were great for generating color swatches and details about which props were available for components, the process was not great for creating our component documentation, which frustrated everyone. One mistake and parts, if not whole chunks of documentation would be missing on the component pages. We had the freedom of using Markdown, yet we weren't taking advantage of it. This was a serious cognitive lift, even for someone who's very familiar with the code base. Now imagine if you had a new contributor to the project, not exactly a welcoming experience. So we decided to review our process and see what wasn't working. One of our biggest issues was we chose to show 1 component variant at a time, rather than all at once. This forced our users to access a select menu over and over again to compare variants, which increased the time they needed to look up information. It didn't make sense. In retrospect, that decision was about as questionable as a recipe that combines Jell-O with shellfish. We decided that it was time to make our docs contribution process more user-friendly and in terms of the structure and how we authored everything, especially the component example pages. We wanted our users to have the confidence that whatever content they wrote in the docs page would end up on that docs page. If we made our docs more user-friendly, we'd have more contributors rather than fewer. We considered our options for making our docs better, and we decided upon Gatsby for a few reasons. One, Gatsby gave us a way to migrate all our main documentation pages right into the site without much fuss. Two, Gatsby provides a Webpack and Babel config similar to Create React App, so we could start with a scaffolded project and extend it to our needs. And three, Gatsby supports MDX, so we could write component documentation using Markdown, import React components right into the file, and it just works. Even better, MDX compiles down into semantic HTML, which in turn gives the site improved accessibility, better support for users that rely on assistive technologies to access the docs. If a design system is promoting inclusivity in general, and it really should, it follows that inclusive docs make sense. As a bonus, with Gatsby, we streamlined our setup from 2 repos to 1 and reduced the amount of CLI commands dramatically. The default setup for Gatsby is great. However, we needed to make some adjustments so Gatsby worked for our needs. In the Gatsby config file, we added the Gatsby plugin post CSS to support post CSS files. We also added Gatsby plugin compile ES6 packages to support our design system package, Gatsby plugin MDX, so the site would recognize MDX files, Gatsby remark auto link headers to generate auto links for page headers. This would be better for screen reader and keyboard support. We also added Gatsby plugin page creator to create pages from the source pages directory, and Gatsby plugin file system, so we could pull in our data and point Gatsby to the folder where all our component MDX files lived. In the Gatsby node file, we added a GraphQL query to find the component MDX content and a create page action to generate routes and pages for the component docs. In the Gatsby browser file, we added things we wanted to apply throughout the site, like our global CSS styles and the wrap root element component. The wrap root element component acts as a wrapper around the site's root element, and it will import the MDX provider. This way, the entire site will recognize MDX content. We had to do one extra thing for our component docs page template, though. Since our component MDX files were located outside of the source pages folder, MDX renderer was needed to wrap the contents of our component page template. Otherwise, our MDX files would render like this in the browser. Now that our layout used the MDX renderer component to wrap the content, our component MDX pages would render as we wanted in the browser. Now we could pop in React components next to the code blocks, and they would render in our docs, no problem. We could even wrap a button component with a display box component and add a more cohesive look to the component and code block pairing. If we wanted to add a props table to show which props can be used in each component, and created a component that pulled in data to render as a table component, popped that component into the docs MDX file, passed in the name of the component to render, and voila, the docs would show a props table. For the component do's and don'ts, we used to have to write out an unordered list in the markdown file, and the list rendered like this. With MDX support, we instead created a custom component that will render unordered lists. We could pass in a do's list and a don'ts list array into the component, and boom, a nicely styled do's and don'ts component section for your site. Code blocks. Markdown has great code block support. MDX makes those even more powerful. So we were psyched to add this feature. You can override the styling of a code block in MDX with a custom code block, or even display different types of code blocks. This is my favorite feature. You can use with a Prism React renderer package in a custom code block component and import a theme with good color contrast. Wrap your code block and theme it. Import that code block into your wrap root element along with the pre-to-code block utility, and override the default pre-styling at the app level by passing it in as a component to that wrap root element file. So now when you write a code block in MDX, instead of the baseline styling, the custom code block will render with syntax highlighting. Now here's a fun fact. You can pass in a prop to that code block and do really cool things if you use custom code blocks. For example, if you abstract this MDX into a dryer pattern into our custom code block component and pass the display box prop into the code block, if you add the display box prop into the code blocks in MDX, you'll get a display box paired with a code block. What if you want your code block to be an editable code block? You can do that? Yes, you can. You can add a React Live option into your component and show the component inside a display box pairing with an editable code block. So if you add the React Live prop to your MDX code block in your MDX file, you'll get an editable code block and see your changes in real time. So if we write something like this, this is what you'll see in the app. I'm going to show you a side-by-side example of these three options. Okay, so let me open my demo for you. There we go. So in this page, I have added here, we have MDX with the React Live prop passed in here. Here we just passed in, used just JSX and JSX syntax without any extra props. And here we added the display box prop to the code block. So here, you can't edit this file. Here, it's just nice and pretty, but here, look at this one. I can type now, and it's editable. You can see your changes in real time. And let's see if I have any other. I just added another. I made a small button. I can make a large button. I can, let's see if I have an icon for that. Nope. I don't have icon support, but if I did have icon support, or if I remembered the icons that I have supported in this property, I could add icons in here. But what's really cool about this is with the React Live prop in your JSX, you can start making editable files and demo things right in your documentation. This way, your developers can sandbox your components right in your documentation and learn the better way to use these components in a more interactive learning process. So back to the slides. To wrap up. Okay, so to wrap up, if your documentation setup is brittle, your contributors will flee. But with Gatsby and MDX, your docs can be inclusively slewed in both setup and execution. Then your contributors will return and will be happy to be part of your team. Thank you.